every relationship is shaped, is made in the crucible of hard conversations, right? Can you have the difficult conversation? Can you say the thing you're afraid to say? And can you express your need without fearing that if you do, something bad will happen? And so many of the times people end up in painful relationships, or not even relationships. They end up in painful dynamics, or they end up in limbo with someone where it never ends up as a relationship. Yes. It's always casual, is because they're afraid to have the hard conversations. There was this woman that was one of the hosts of the show. And she said to me, I really struggle to have hard conversations. And I don't know why. I just, every time I go to have a hard conversation, it's like I break out in sweats and I panic, and she said it wasn't in my family, like no one's really ever had hard conversations. She said, and she didn't realize what she was saying as she said it, but she said, it's like my dad, for example, if I try to have a hard conversation with him, he just leaves the room.
Right.
And she kept going, but she didn't realize what she had said, which is your entire life, because that wasn't a pattern your dad started yesterday, right? Your dad's most likely been like that since the day you were born. Uh-huh. So what you learned is that if you tried to have a hard conversation with your father, he would leave the room.
He would abandon you.
So now you have what therapists call a core abandonment wound, right? This is something that's now with you. And you wonder why with this person that you're on date 3 with, who shouldn't even be that important to you, why it feels hard to articulate that, you are disappointed that they showed up half hour late to the date, or that they didn't text you for a week and then all of a sudden reached out of nowhere to say, do you want to do something in 1 hour? And then you went without expressing that, hey, we had 2 great dates, and then you were I didn't hear from you for a week, and now you're like, are you ready in an hour? The reason she didn't express that and the reason it made her so terrified to express it, irrationally terrified, is because in her world, it's been perfectly rational. It's not. This is where compassion comes in, because we're very good at calling ourselves crazy. I feel crazy. Why am I so scared of having this conversation? Or we get called crazy by other people. That's a favorite thing to call people. She was crazy. They're crazy. You can't believe what they tried to do or what they said to me. They're not crazy. Something happened. So they experienced something in their world at a time when it was their reality. It was her reality growing up. And I'm extrapolating here, but like I said, if she's saying that about her dad, almost certainly her dad didn't start doing that last week.
Right.
He's been doing it her whole life. It was real for her that there was a time in her life where if she tried to express a need with her father, or tell him something that she wasn't happy with, or something that she'd like him to do more of or less of, or a way that he'd hurt her, he would not be able to have the conversation, and he would leave. That, when you're a child, that poses a real threat to you.
Yes.
So what she's feeling now is rational for her in her world based on where she came from. We look at it from the outside and go, I can't believe that she would be so afraid to say this thing. And she's going to end up in a 2-year relationship with someone who never meets any of her needs, who doesn't even know what her needs are, who she resents deep down because it's like, he never thinks of me.
Yeah.
But she's terrified to have that conversation because for her, if she has a hard conversation, it means abandonment. And abandonment means, on an emotional level, not a logical level, she might not survive.
Yes.
And so when someone says, I struggle, I find it a turnoff when someone is nice, they are articulating a deep, deep pattern that has been there for a long time in their life, that they didn't choose, and that they may not even be aware of.
And most likely it sounds like their father probably was either rude to their mother or rude to them as a child, or maybe had some, behavioral patterns that caused them to feel rude at different times.
Yeah, or they, were neglected and they felt like in order to get attention, they had to do a lot, or they had to be, the golden child, or they had to, meet everyone's needs. They had to go out of their way all the time to make someone happy. And so, and then they'd get like, whether it's from the father or the mother, they'd get like a hit of love. And all of a sudden it's like, like, I feel calm, I feel safe. Oh, this feels so good. And then of course it's right back to, the next day they're cold again, and you have to fight for that next hit. And so if you've experienced that and now you're out there looking for love, you may very well have developed the association that love is something you have to earn. Love is something that comes in fits and starts. Love is something that you're grateful when you get a hit of it, and then you have to endure these periods of someone being cold in order to get the next hit. And of course that's, what's known as the trauma bond. But that's really what someone is saying. When someone says I get turned off by people who are nice, and I get turned on by people who, give me, and we have all sorts of euphemistic terms for it, like the bad boy, or the person who is super bold, or the person who has an edge or whatever. But a lot of the time what we're talking about is I'm trauma bonded to people who are hot and cold, inconsistent, make me have to earn their love, their attention, take it away from me and then give me it back again. And that, by the way, makes that woman who said that a perfect target for abusive people. It makes them a perfect target for people who forget like whether they're abusive because they're narcissists or because they're, sociopathic. It makes you a perfect target for someone who's in even just a selfish phase of their life. Because someone who's in a selfish phase of their life takes what they can get.
It's intermittent, it's up and down, it's hot and cold.
They're glad to be around someone who doesn't ask a lot of them.
Yeah.
So even if you don't get someone who's truly toxic and abusive, you're still going to attract people who are selfish.
Yes.
And those people are going to waste your time and your energy because they're not where you're at. But you never test the relationship because this is on some level what you're looking for. This is what's familiar to you.
Man, this is so, I can relate to this because in previous seasons of life, I really struggled of having the hard conversations. Like I dreaded it.
Oh.
So, looking back, I can say, man, that's crazy. Just have the conversation and whatever, just deal with it. But in the moment, when I didn't have the tools or the nervous system to feel safe myself, and I needed the approval of someone else to feel safe, or I needed someone else to be okay with the hard conversation that I was having. And when they weren't okay with it, or they would explode, or they would cry, or they would scream, or they would, not speak to me for 2 days or something because they were upset of what I wanted to talk about, or they avoided it, it would make me feel like, oh, I'm really insecure. And I always had the fear of like, I guess it was being alone, or it was like the person not loving me in return, or me not being good enough or something like that. There was probably a combination of insecurities or fears that caused me to be afraid of having difficult conversations and just saying what I really wanted to say. And then I remember having like, throat clenching and like heart palpitations over like years of being in these different relationships where I never felt like I was able to speak up. And I can't blame the other person. We can never blame the other person for our decision to not communicate, not set standards, not say the things we need to say. We can't blame the other person, but it always felt like, oh, this person isn't willing to accept me for who I am if I say the full truth, or if I talk about the things that I'm uncomfortable with. If I don't like this situation, they will not accept me. And they didn't accept me for my authentic conversations or my truth. But I was afraid of losing them, for them not accepting me for who I was. And therefore it was never going to work out. And it wasn't until I started to really understand that and become aware of it and start to heal that process, a lot of things changed with Martha, because I was like, wow, this is an incredible human being in front of me that I'm starting to date and connect with and meet. Wow, she's pretty special. But I got to the point where I was like, but I can't be willing to lose myself in order to try to have someone want to stay with me. I cannot go down this path again, which I'd done 5 or 6 times in 20 years in different relationships, where I lost myself to try to please someone else so that they'd want to like and love me. And therefore hating myself in return, resenting myself, resenting the person, resenting the relationship, feeling guilty of why I wasted all this time and energy being in this relationship, fighting for it, while all the while I was losing myself and losing my self-respect in that process. And it wasn't until Martha, I was like, oh man, I'm going to have the uncomfortable conversations pretty early on, right? In the first few months, I'm going to talk about, these are my standards. These are my values. This is what I want. And this is what I'm not willing to deal with in a relationship. And be willing to say, maybe this isn't the right fit. If you don't have the same or similar standards, and if you aren't willing to fully accept all of me, my past, my shames, my insecurities, etc., then maybe we're not the right fit. But that means I might not be with a great person in front of me. And that's a scary thing.
Well,
but it was scary, but it also set me free when I made the decision, like, okay, I'd rather be free and be fully myself, authentic to myself, than trying to please and change who I am to be with someone, to have them like and love me. And that set me free to say all the conversations I wanted to. And it was like the more honest and hard conversations I had, it was like the more she fell in love with me.